We'll go over to Kai.
Kai Küstner, ARD German Radio. You kind of rushed through a little bit the possible challenges or threats you could address in this exercise: terrorism, autocratic state leaders. Can you be a bit more specific and also tell us if hybrid warfare is going to be one of the challenges you will want to address? And one further question, if I may. You mentioned the NGOs. Can you already give us some names of NGOs that will be present?
So, of course, you'd forgive us if some aspects of what will be played out in the exercise are not completely in the public domain right now, because there has to be an element of training and exercise and everything else. Some of that is a departure into the unknown for the troops taking part. But the exercise will reflect the world as we see it today and the conditions that we can see in the near future. And on the scope and scale and complexity that we're looking at here, the scenario has been built over years, as I said, to include almost every single evolution you can imagine out there. And from that evolution over the past year and a half or so, sort of storylines have been developed, challenges directly related to how we want the troops to be exercised and tested and evaluated in the current conditions. So you're right. I touched on a couple of things, terrorism, subversion, that sort of instability in a brewing crisis. And of course, that's shorthand for a whole range of things. That will obviously escalate, requiring the application of 36,000 plus troops. I mentioned the fact that we'll be looking at testing and evaluating new concepts and new methods of operation around cyber, missile defense, interconnected communication networks that General Dom Rosa referred to, and so on and so forth. So there'll be a huge wide spectrum of challenges for the troops at every level, not just in terms of military maneuver, but also in terms of how you nuance the security presence with other security actors and the civil domain and sovereign governments and their requirements and everything else. Hybridity, yes. I mean, we run something like 200 exercises a year in NATO right now at various different levels. And this sense of hybridity and ambiguity and this sense of crises evolving out of instability is present in our training right now. This isn't something that's necessarily particularly novel in that sense. How we deal with it in the current context is something that we're very much focusing on. And of course that speaks very much to the sort of thoughts that General Dom Rosa was outlining around interaction with the EU and civil actors and everything else.
Yeah, if I may add, thank you, Phil. Terrorism, for example, there are mines, we call it IED, explosives planted somewhere on the road in a village. They threaten the population. We know it. Now the question is, who plants those bloody mines? Who is responsible? So we are trying to get into the network. It is not the poor man who plants it. It is somebody with a white collar who dictates, you go and plant. So, in other words, we play this. And the key to terrorism is obviously intel-driven operations. And we've got to learn intel-driven operations. So you do not simply fight against something. You have to have a plan. And if you want to fight a network, you better do it within a network. So that is modern warfare. It is not tank moving to a tank. That is easy. As I said, we can do this 24/7 everywhere. That's easy. More complicated is network operations, intel-driven operations. And for example, very easy to understand, if you want to have intel-driven operations, you need highly sophisticated modern equipment. So in other words, if you don't see anything, you are blind, and then it's complicated. But if you have something in the air, you see something, you look to the horizon, and you see everything, then you can distinguish between the good man and the bad man. And nobody talked about SOF, my friends, special operations. They are always on, very skilled, very agile young men and women, and they have ears on the ground. They hear a lot. So that is a sensor, if you will. It is not only flying material, it is sensors, human sensors. They live in the country, they live within the villages, they know what's going on, and they know that is a good man, this person is, I'm not sure, but this is a dark man. So Intel-driven operations. Hybrid warfare, cyber was mentioned, yes. But also, may I take your wonderful invitation to hashtag TJ15. Yes, we will also play media, obviously. We will play social engagement, social media, hashtag something, and we will challenge our staff by propaganda. So what is true, what is not true? Pictures manipulated. So where's the truth? So we will have to follow hashtag things, media, television, and others, and then in the end the staff will very much challenge and try to find out what is right, what is wrong, and how can we react. Certainly we will not use propaganda, we will always tell the truth. And other things. NGOs, I must apologize. We have more than a dozen NGOs. There are a few amongst them who said we are eager to participate, but please do not mention my name. And I respect this. So if an NGO, if you come and visit us, is there and he wants to say, yes, I am from German Deutscher Rote Kreuz, it's his business. But it is not my call to say. I stick to my bigger friends like the EU, like the ICRC, human rights, USAID, the smaller ones. They want to announce it themselves, and I very much appreciate. Thank you.
Okay, I've got about 4 questions. I've got Brooks, Julian, Daniel, Jan. Okay, so we'll start with Brooks.
Thanks. Yes, Brooks, Tigner, Jane's Defense. One of the key Wales tasks was to make the NRF more flexible and particularly faster to deploy. I'm just wondering, leaving aside the exercise itself, will you be tracking how quickly the Allies can get to the Trident theater itself? Because that would offer some interesting metrics about what they're able, how quickly they're able to deploy. And then within the exercise itself, will you be specifically challenging the players' ability to deploy from a non-readiness status on certain vignettes?
Yeah, thank you. You mentioned the IRF. That is the past. In the future, we talk about the VJTF. It's a new name, but it is a change in quality. Now, I think it is kind of open secret that the VJTF should be available within a few days. So let's assume that a few days is less than a week. So then technically we would always have something that says go, then the scouts go, then the bulk of the forces, and then the other forces. So within a few days, fine. That is fast. That is fast. And one should, I'm talking about the land heavy brigade element. I'm not talking about aircraft. I'm traveling a lot within my area in Europe. And I can tell you, from Brussels, it's always 2 hours. So we should never underestimate the power and the speed of air power. So we have always aircraft available. Always. We have designated aircraft in the Baltic arena. In other words, we call it air policing. They are there 24/7, 365 days. Then we have national assets available. And then we have the NRF portion available, and they can fly within hours. Now, the real thing is twofold. First, our political leadership will have to take a decision within a few days. Without a political decision, I will not march. Second, we can only get a political decision if we have indications and warnings. No indication and warnings, no movement. So, assuming that we have indication and warnings, then the Supreme Allied Commander, General Phil Breedlove, will go to the NEC, our political body, will seek advice, or he will say, this is serious, I want you to set free the VJTF. Then they say yes or no, very simple. And then the section says yes, with the team, of course, and then they go within a few days, then they are deployed. And we can do. If that was your question.
My question was, are you going to track how quickly the Allies can get their assets to the Trident battlefield? Just to measure what the metrics are.
No, we don't do this. Nations deploy on their national plans. But we did test bedding. I know exactly that a transport ship from Lisbon to Lithuania, fully loaded, takes 4 days. To load it, to sail it, to unload it, if you wanted one ship. But there are bigger ships traveling faster. So
let me just comment on that. We've got a couple of the young architects of the NATO exercise regime sitting in the back of the room, and Chris Hahn back there, who I'll name check, is our young US Navy aviator who runs an awful lot of the architecture for these exercises. And as I said, we run about 200 of these. This happens to be a pretty big one, and it's been long planned to be a pretty big one, and we'll do pretty big ones pretty periodically. There are other big ones. And so that sense of readiness and evaluation is something we do month in, month out with various components. That sense of the completeness of the staff, their training readiness to be ready for what they do, their sort of training standards and everything else, their deployability. That training regime has a logic to it that runs throughout the year. It has a rhythm to it that runs over a couple of years that attends to all of those questions of testing out the deployability, making sure the nations have put the right bits and pieces in place for their forces, making sure the staff and the communications and everything else plugs together. And every single dimension of that, we have test and evaluation and experimentation throughout the day. And at the end of that sort of process, or periodically during the process, you have sort of semi-formal evaluations where senior commanders such as Dom Rosa can stand there with a sense of science and art together to say this military force can do what it wants to do. Now, it's not a driving component of this exercise, this particular exercise, to drive those metrics, but we have those in other dimensions.
I should say, I can assure you that this Spanish-led VJTF for my team in 16 will be tested on deployability. But I can't tell you the date because my Spanish then would prepare. So be assured they will be tested and they will move within Europe. But apart from this exercise, this is a special focus is on deployability.
I'm sure everybody knows what the VJTF is, the Very High Readiness Joint Task Force, but just in case, also known as the Spearhead Force. We'll go to the Julian in the third row, then we'll take Jan and John, and I know there are, and Daniel in the back.
Thanks, Julian Barnes, Wall Street Journal. Why invite the Russians as observers? And is there a risk of, if there are weaknesses in the response force, that you will be showcasing them to the Russians?
Yeah, thank you. A very simple answer it would be that we are members of these treaties. So we have open skies, we have exercise limitations, or we say if a certain number of participants is overseeded, we announce it. It is like our DNA. It is the treaty regime, and we follow this regime, and I have no problem with it. Secondly, they will watch us anyhow, invited or not. We are talking about a modern nation, whether you accept it or not. They have satellites also. So it's not so that Russia doesn't see anything. So they are, according to the regimes we all signed, and we are loyal to our treaties. We fulfill our treaties. They can come. And they will listen uninvited, I don't know. I was just recently with my maritime forces on HMS Ocean in the Baltic Sea, and guess who flew over our bridge? A Russian aircraft. It's open sky. They can do, and they accompanied us with their ships. It's fine. That's easy for us. And with regards to whether they see the difference between good or better, I'll leave it up to them. But they will be hopefully impressed.
Of course, we have the absolute humility to acknowledge the fact that observers will observe weaknesses, but let's not also lose the sense that this has been a great demonstration of alliance solidarity. And the fact that this exercise has grown somewhat exponentially in the wake of the annexation of Crimea and the proxy war in Ukraine